Hi everyone, I'm John from Sophos and welcome to this short video where we'll be looking in more detail at some of the web content filtering capabilities of the XG firewall. It's certainly a strong set of features in the XG. There's lots of in-depth options when it comes to control and reporting on web usage and activity. So without further ado, let's have a quick look at the agenda we'll be going through. So first and foremost, we'll begin by looking at creating your own web content filter policy. And then we'll look at how you can use that to control not only web activity, but also the types of files that are permitted downloads. Then we'll look at how to attach your completed rule to a firewall policy in order to make it active. And we'll look at in more detail about how you can set the XG up to decrypt SSL transactions. Then we'll look at the reporting capabilities on the XG before finishing off with dynamic keyword analysis and content filtering. Okay, let's hop into the XG's management console, and you'll see on the left hand side, if you scroll down just a little, that we have a section dedicated to web content filtering. So let's hop in there and have a look in more detail at what we can do. So here are our predefined web policies. So the XG comes with a bunch of sensible web policies out of the box, and as I'm doing here, you can create your own as well. So I'm going to call this one my new web policy, and then I'm going to add a rule. And here's where I'm going to determine who this rule applies to. And what we can do is select various different groups from places like Active Directory or individual users and apply this policy to those users. So I'm going to create a policy here for the Active Directory group of managers. And what I'm going to do is start looking at the web categories that they are allowed and blocked from. So what I'm going to do here is filter out things like alcohol, tobacco, anonymizers, and criminal activity. So some fairly sensible sets of restrictions there. And I'm going to flick the switch to turn that rule on. And then the users will be able to access the vast majority of websites except these three categories that we've created. Now, what I'm going to do is also create a secondary policy as well. And this one is going to be for, let's say, the sixth form group. So again, another group in Active Directory. And I'm going to be a little bit more restrictive with them. So what we're going to do is block alcohol and tobacco, anonymizers again, criminal activity, controlled substances, and things like extremist sites, gambling, hacking, and we'll pick one more, military and nudity. There we go. So what we've done there is blocked a sensible selection of sites that probably wouldn't be appropriate for this type of user. And then what I'm also going to do is use the web filter to control file type. So I'm going to block audio files, I'm going to block executables, and I'm going to apply that policy to everybody. There we go. So we've created there a fairly sophisticated set of rules that is tailored for various different users and groups. And what I can also do here is decide that I want to enforce things like safe search and to enforce YouTube restrictions as well. But I will need the web proxy enabled to be able to do those things because they are required to be a little bit more involved in the traffic to carry out those filters. Okay, so as well as being able to block types of sites, there are some other options as well. So let's have a quick look at what those other options are. So as well as blocking or allowing, then I can also warn or I can apply a quota. Now a quota is basically the ability to allocate a certain amount of time to browsing to certain sites. So this is really good for organizations maybe that don't have a definition of lunchtime, for example. You could allow users to have up to 1 hour's worth of social media at any point during the day. So that's what the quota service does as well. Okay, so once I finish creating that rule, you'll see that it's giving me a warning here to say that this policy, although it exists, isn't actually active at the moment because inside XG's architecture, all web content filter policies have to be attached to a firewall rule. So it's encouraging me here to go to the firewall rules so that we can start to pin that to some actually active rules. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to the egress rule, and now if I go to the web content filtering section, then I can change this web policy here to the one that I've just created. So that's my new web policy that I've created. So we can drop that in. And here you can also see as well that we've got some additional controls here around things like malware, content scanning, and also options around the decryption of HTTPS traffic as well. So you might remember that we looked at the decryption options in one of the previous videos, but it's worth going back over that again because it's an important use of the web filter capabilities, given of course that so much traffic these days is also using HTTPS. So let's go and have a look at the decryption options in a little bit more detail. And here you can see some of the SSL and TLS inspection rules are already in place, but I'm going to create a new policy here to show you what some of those options look like. So we're going to call this a decrypt HTTPS, and I'm going to apply this decryption policy to all of my LAN zones. So I could be more specific. I could highlight individual source devices or networks, but I'm going to keep it simple and just keep it to all of my internal traffic over services HTTPS. So what this selector will do is grab all the traffic coming from my internal network using HTTPS, regardless of its source and regardless of which user is in play. So it's a fairly comprehensive set of rules. And what I'm going to do here is create a new decryption profile. So you probably saw that there's a few predefined decryption profiles, but I'm going to create my own, again, just to show you what those options look like. So here what we can do is determine how we're going to handle non-decryptable traffic. So if we're getting SSL 2.0 or 3.0, we're going to allow that without decryption. If we detect an unrecognized cipher suite, then again, we're going to allow that without decryption. And what this is doing is allowing those traffic types to go through the firewall without them being interrupted. So what we're doing here is aiming for maximum compatibility. What we can also do a bit lower down is we can get more specific about the types of cipher, the types of protocol that are being enforced, but that's probably stuff to save for another time. And obviously what I want to do here is apply this policy to all traffic that's coming from the inside of the network going out to the outside world. So that's a very quick creation there of an SSL and TLS decryption profile, which again I can pin to a firewall rule. Now, of course, if we're going to intercept users' web browsing activities, we may as well create some reports on it as well. So you can hop straight into the reporting section and first of all go to the security dashboard that will show you lots of useful information about all sorts of things going on the XG firewall, including web activity. Very strong suite in the XG, and depending on the size of appliance you've got, can retain reporting data for up to 12 months. If you want to understand more about what's going on, then you can go to the dedicated web filtering section, and here you can see in the chart that we get the top 5 records for things like web domains, web categories, which is particularly useful. This gives you good insight to see that most of the browsing activity is productive, and you can also see the domains in more detail, and we can expand that list out as well so that we can get a little bit more detail. So here we've gone for the last top 10 hits, and then I can expand even further to get literally every single hit. So these are all the web categories, and everything you see here is clickable. So if you want to know more about how people are using things like online shopping, for example, then you can see which users and the number of hits involved, and get a lot more information about the kinds of activity that users are getting up to. So hugely useful reports. So one other very useful report that's often requested is individual users' browsing activity, and that's pretty easy to get hold of as well. So you can go down to the web user section and you can click on the user that you're interested in. In this case, we're going to click on Keith Richards, and we're going to see his browsing activity. And we can see all the information here about his browsing reports, and we can bookmark these for future use, or we can schedule these reports for automatic distribution to the people who need them, like line managers, for example, or maybe the HR department. Okay, so there's one other trick up the XG firewall sleeve that I want to share with you, because everything we've looked at up until now relies on the website having been classified already. But of course, the web is a dynamic place and content comes and goes all the time. And how we handle that is using keyword analysis. So what we can do is go back to our web policy and we can add in a content filter, which is looking for keywords and phrases. You can create these lists yourself, or they're very easy to access them online and embed import a suitable file which contains appropriate terms that you may want to look at in more detail. So I've added one in already. You can see it at the bottom of this list, which is called safeguarding and terrorist related. So that may be full of keywords and phrases associated with those kind of activities that we may want to look at in a little bit more detail. And how we can actually use those lists? Well, if we go back to one of our pre-existing web filter policies, then I can add in an additional check here, putting in an additional rule associated with not necessarily the type of web traffic, but the content filters that match terminology which is in my extensive list here of safeguarding and terrorist related sites. I don't necessarily want to block those, but what I'm going to do instead is simply log that traffic so that we can look at that traffic in more detail. Okay, so now we've got that policy saved, we can put that to the test and start to run some traffic through there. In the interest of time, however, what I'm going to do is go back into my reporting data, and we're going to go back historically, and we're going to look into activities that have already gone through the firewall that we've got some hits on. So this time we're going to go back into the reports and we're going to look at the web content filter list, and you can see that we have in excess of 5,000 hits on our keyword list of safeguarding and terrorist related terminology. And you can see also that we have information on the users and the websites associated with each of those. So if I want to see that list in more detail, I can click through and we can see all of the websites and all of the users. And again, everything here is clickable. So if I was particularly interested in Keith Richards' activity, for example, then I can click through that Keith Richards link, and we can open up that activity and find out what Keith's been up to in a little bit more detail. Okay, so here we can see all of the websites associated with Keith Richards' activity that have bounced off the list of keywords, and I can open up that list and I can see in more detail. And if we look through that list and scroll through it, there's nothing in here which is necessarily too concerning. All of these websites look to be pretty much mainstream. And you can see whether these keyword triggers are associated with reads. So in other words, the content is already on the website, or you can see whether they're posts. So this is where users have been writing things that match the keywords that you've specified. You can see there's a high number of hits on the Daily Mail website for the keywords that we've already listed. But of course, context is everything. So if we want to understand where those hits have come from and information around them, we can do that. If we hop into the log viewer and go to the web content policy list, and then we can search for Keith, and here we can see all of the log entries associated with the content filter list and Keith. Then you can see on the right hand column here, you can see the text that surrounds the keyword that's been triggered. So here you can see the term murder, but you can look at this and you can see that that's a news article related to some kind of murder in the press. So you can see and understand the context associated with the triggers that have gone off. And that helps to understand in more detail whether it's an innocent trigger for something which is perfectly acceptable, or something that potentially is a little bit more concerning. Okay, there you have it. There is a very quick look through some of the powerful web content filtering capabilities that you'll find inside the XG Firewall. I hope you found the overview useful. And of course, as always, if you've got any questions that haven't been covered, then do reach out to your account manager or to myself. And of course, we'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. But for now, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.